that year. Okay, a few of you. You apparently are doing better at it than I am. In any case, my name is Robert Allen Coughenhour. Most of you who know me at all know that my name here at the Shores is Coke. And the reason is this. When we came, there were two couples whose last name was Coughenhour. My name was Coughenhour, and their name was Coughenhour. But his name was John Robert, and he always went by Bob. Well, I always went by Bob too, because I've got the tattoo to prove it. But we didn't want to actually do that. We didn't want a fight over who's going to be named what. So I decided to go with Coke. And the Coke comes from the GH in Coughenhour, which is a Celtic name from the north of France. And in Celtic languages, of which there are 3 extant ones, the GH is a K sound. So I don't care what Beulah says. Our name is Coughenhour. It's an odd name. But there are many of us in the country. I don't really know how many. But that's just one thing. That's just a name. I'm here, I guess, to tell you about myself, my life, my world. And how can I do that? Following Paula, who has wonderful stories of her experience in all kinds of interesting things. And all I did was teach and preach. This is how inept I was about all this. I actually planned and thought about it. And I prepared, in fact, a pass-out thing for you. But I thought we were meeting in a small room, and that there'd probably be maybe a dozen people, or maybe even 10. And so I have copies of 10 of the handouts that are going to tell you what you really ought to read. And I'm going to be able, in the time we have, just to tell you a few things about my life. What this amounts to, just to let you know, it has to do with what Betty and I have done here at the Shores to exercise the gifts that we have to do that. And it turns out to be a fair amount of things that we did. For example, this starts in 2009 when we came, and it runs only to 2015. And after 2015, a lot of our time was spent with getting the Eckerd relationship and the Shores relationship together, helping Bettina to do that, serving on a committee and first about it all, and then being active with the conversation groups and with individual students that were making it possible to have a strong relationship between Eckerd College and the Shores. But this has, first of all, it says Coke's presentations. Well, if you want to know what I did for a living, if you just listen to the topics that I made presentations about, I think that's one way that you get a sense of how do you know about all that? Well, it's what what I did for a living, you're going to be hearing. These were all PowerPoints. I'm not going to read them all, but they're just some of them. One of them was one of the first I did was a Lenten lesson from C.S. Lewis in a PowerPoint. I did a Petra, Rose Red City, half as old as time, because I spent a lot of my time in the Middle East, in the Near East, in Israel and Jordan, some 30 years actually, from time to time, because I was actually working in the States as well, and going to bed with the Psalms. Now that's a little odd, but that's what I did. A visit to Bethlehem, yes. Living in the mystery of God's will. I have the document that I created for that, and the PowerPoint. That would be a fun one to do again, if I live long enough. Yeah. Well, how about this one? 15 things you ought to know from the Bible. Digs I've dug, right? What else? The stones cry out. That was an exhibition of artifacts at the Shores. I've done two artifact presentations and talking about them and my work in archaeology. And one at Suncoast, and then in January of 2019, the new the new cabinets went up here on this floor, and some of you saw. But how many of you paid attention to the presentation? Well, a fair number. That's good. So that it also then you saw some pictures of digs we were at and some things we saw there, and also you saw pictures of King Hussein, who turned out to be a remarkable person that we met in 1960 in the first excavation that we did, and I was on the team then. And he was coming to the West Bank in his helicopter, and he parked it not far from the American School of Oriental Research. And we met the king, and he invited some of us, a few of us, to go with him down to Beersheba, all the way from Jerusalem to Beersheba, so that he could visit with his people on the West Bank. And as a result, that turned out to be a person that I had a relationship to. I won't call him absolutely a personal friend, but a person to whom I could go when, if I needed anything in the country of Jordan. And in fact, he managed to give us, that is us, is the American archaeologists who belong to the craft of archaeology. The American School of Oriental Research in Jerusalem was built and started in 1900, and there are elements of it then that spread around. There's one in Greece, and there's one in Jordan, and that happened after the '67 war. 9 of us who were involved in this went across the river and established an American presence there, and it was all part of having known the king. He wound up by deciding to give us the land on which to build the American Center of Oriental Research in Jordan. And it was a wonderful thing. It really continues to be. It had its 50th year in 2019. And a very lovely brochure, I served as the president of the board of trustees of that institution for a number of years. Anyway, that's why I talk about digs that I've dug. There are many more than that, but that was one we did that mattered. And you saw the exhibition of it in the cabinets. Okay, Qumran and Dead Sea Scrolls. I spent a lot of time talking about Qumran. Qumran is the city, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they were finally found. And I did that as a presentation for marketing here. They came and asked me if it wasn't for all the residents, but for people in marketing. And I taught a course in studies in Islam, for example. And I talked about the Bible and homosexuality. And I talked about beginnings in wisdom of the Old and New Testament. Because mostly when we talk about Scripture, we talk about Jesus being what? What?
Son of God?
What are the three names we give?
Prophet, priest, and king.
Prophet, priest.
What?
Prophet, priest,
Prophet,
priest, and
priest,
King.
and
king.
king. And my 40-year drive has been to say, what happened to the sage? There's a facet of the Scriptures that is of the wisdom tradition. And it's completely different and unusual. And it matters. And now it's, lots of people have gotten into thinking of the same way. But that's one thing. So I have taught a course here on beginnings and wisdom. Yeah. Then I had a group of things that we did additionally here as a member of the chapel choir. I was a member, and Betty was too, from 2009 until just recently. I wasn't able to continue with that, and it has to do with an issue of health that I don't need to tell you all the stuff. You don't need to know that. But in any case, that was very important. I chaired the Spiritual Life Committee for a couple of years. I directed the chapel choir because one of my facets of life is a music facet. In fact, it covers 2 pages in this blurb that I presented. I'm not going to read it to you, but there are a couple of interesting things about it. The archaeological one is one thing. I did some publications that were kind of interesting of the archaeology. I forgot to say something about that. I remember publishing, for example, the entry on Jericho in the Hasmonean and New Testament periods in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia in 1986. And I also did, in that same one, 12 articles on metals, and wrote the main article on metals and metallurgy. My colleagues in the field knew me as a person that knew about metals, simply because I was the first excavator of the iron industry in Jordan. So they thought I probably knew something about metals. I didn't know that much about metals, but I certainly did a lot of research. You can count on it. So that was sort of fun. And then I was invited to lecture, in fact, in 1986 at the annual meeting of the American Metallurgical Society. That was unusual. And for more than 25 years, I directed the Kyle Kelso Foundation, which is a nonprofit corporation dedicated to the funding of archaeological research in Jordan, especially. So, you know, lots of things. I started to say about the music resume. When I graduated from high school, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And so I followed my brothers, two of them who had gone to Texas, one in 1938 and the other in 1936, and they were well established. And I went and spent a little time after my graduation from high school working in the oil field as a kind of a roustabout, doing the scuttle work, whatever you needed to do around the drill rig and so on. And I decided that there was no way in God's green earth that I'd ever want to do what my brother wanted me to do. And he wanted me to study oil geology, and he'd pay my way to college to do it. And I said, David, I can't be living in the oil fields. And he said, well, what else are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. But I went back home and talked to Quentin Wagner, who was my music teacher at the high school. And I had been singing and playing instruments, especially brass instruments. And he said, well, you know, you're not going to be the most wonderful musician, but you do have a little something of talent that you got somewhere. And he said, I think you do pretty well teaching music. Why don't you go up to Indiana State Teachers College in Pennsylvania and get a music degree? Huh? That'd be one thing to do. And so I did. And there I met this lady that we've been together and friends for a long time. We're married for 66 years, but we've been together for 67. And it's been kind of fun. And she is a remarkable woman. She has 4 children with us. You know, we have a family of 4 children. And it was boy, girl, and it took 11 years to achieve it. And they're doing very nicely, thank you. But yeah, Amy is 54 now. She's the youngest. And she's the CEO of a company in DC. She's doing very well. She has 2 children, and they're doing very well. It's you know, it's a lot. I think a couple of things about the music. When I finished the degree, I taught, and I taught music in a little town in Pennsylvania, Hilewood, and it was a Pine Township High School, actually. That was 53, 54. That was a long time ago. And I was elected to a Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonio, which was a fraternity, a music fraternity. And when I had finished that years of teaching, the United States Army decided it needed me. It was during the Korean War wasn't finished yet, Korean event, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't over yet, and the draft was still on, so I was drafted. And they sent me to 2 schools. They sent me to a music school so I could figure out how the Army does its band and choral work, and to the chief and the clerk typist school. And so I became the chief clerk when the old man decided that he needed somebody that to teach how to take care of a unit. And also then, it was interesting because there were four units, Army units, posts in and around Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I was stationed. And they were having a contest to see who would do a special thing for the United States Army. And the chorale was the question. Well, there was a big thing about it, and you know, to see who was going to win. And our chorus from Fort Dix, New Jersey, became the chorale that went to New York. And what we did was we sang with the Fort Dix Soldiers Chorus for those years in the service. And we appeared on weekly primetime TV show called Soldier Parade. The Mistress of Ceremonies was Arlene Francis. Do you remember? Anybody remember Arlene Francis? She was wonderful with us. And we were on Channel 7, WABC TV, New York. And it was Sunday night in prime time. And we did appearances twice on the Ed Sullivan Show, and appearances twice on the Kate Smith Show in Philadelphia. And she treated us like wonderful. I mean, it was amazing how she took care of our guys. There were just 22 in that chorus, and it was special. And we did also an appearance on the Eddie Fisher Show. It was, I think it was a 15-minute show, and it probably should have been 12. He was the only one we ever saw who actually passed out pictures of himself and shook everybody's hand, whether we wanted to do that or not. He was a piece of work, Eddie Fisher. Do you remember Eddie Fisher? Yeah. He could sing, couldn't he? I guess. Anyway, that turned out to be a role of, and I continued to sing and do musical things. One of the fun things that I did was I created the role of Renaudot, in a musical version of Cyrano, and it had been written by Jose Ferrer. And the music that was written for it was by Robert Wright and Chet Forrest. I don't know whether you know those names, but they were famous for their Kismet in movies, in the movie Kismet. And so I was teaching at Hope College in Holland, Michigan at the time, and the theater department contacted Jose Ferrer so that he could come and play Cyrano for the production. And he said no, he was too old to do it, but if we did it, he would have the world premiere of the show at the college. And so he came and spent 2 or 3 weeks with us, And it was really quite an experience. So I created the role of this guy who went around and followed Cyrano and took down all the notes. So that was a very special thing. And then finally, I sang for a number of years for the Master Chorale of Tampa Bay, and in 2001, we sang in Britain. We were invited, it was the first American chorale that had been brought to England in order to finish the musical week that they had. And so we were there on the 4th of July, and we sang the Berlioz Requiem, and it was conducted by the London Symphony Orchestra, and with Sir Colin Davis, who is the conductor, and it was at the closing performance of the City of London Festival at St. Paul's Cathedral.
Wow.
It was a really wonderful experience. It's just imagine, hard to think about all that. Well, yeah, and then when we came here, I sang with, and then I directed the chapel choir for some 4.5 years. But then when we had these friends that had been at Indiana State Teachers College with us, who came to visit us at our request, and their names were Ed and Joy Tobin. Yes. And they decided that they would come. And I decided that what he ought to do is take over directing the choir. Then they'd have somebody that had some experience in conducting. That was interesting.
Joey's husband.
And that worked out. And then I did some singing with the Eckerd College Choir in 2010 as well. My life's work has been made up of teaching. And there's one little thing that I want to make sure that I get to say to you. And that has to do with what I think I have been doing most of my life in teaching. It has to do with self-knowledge. How do you go about teaching self-knowledge? What are the components that go into that? And that became really important when we start working again as we did in what year? 2014? When we started working with Eckerd College students, that issue became primary. Well, how do we help them grow into their own self-knowledge? And so, you know, for humans, there was a lesson that in creative writing. There's a lesson in creative writing that we had to write something about a personal essay to fulfill this lesson requirement. I considered writing on self-knowledge for humans, and it would be a beginner's guide, of course, the philosophy of self-knowledge, or some psychological approaches to self-knowledge, or how about a literary approach to self-knowledge, such as Proust's work, Remembrance of Things Past, or Jane Austen, Emma. What is the true self? Knowledge in an everyday sense. What is the real you made up of? Your true character, what is it? Values, desires, emotions, beliefs. Is such knowledge essential, or is it useful? Socrates thought it was. He said it was needed to live life meaningfully or authentically in a way that is true to yourself. And I think, to tell you the truth, that is exactly the kind of thing that I've spent my life trying to do with the people that I've taught, and especially the students over all those years. I started teaching at the college level in '62. I taught at Westminster College in Pennsylvania, Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and Western Theological Seminary for 21 years. I wanted to tell you about all the things that I wrote, but there's no time. I only published 7 books. I couldn't get any more in. But essays, short essays, and sermons, oh my gosh. I can't imagine how many. I know for sure of 300. And all of them had to do with how one lives one's life in one way or another. And I hope that, in fact, I hope that I have been thankful for everything that had been given to me. Did you read what we published in the Shores newsletter in 2015? Any of you here in 2015? Yeah. Here's what I published on being thankful. For what I am thankful. For what am I thankful beyond the expected family, friends, and food at Thanksgiving time? I'm grateful for the ineffable mystery of life. I'm thankful for wonder more than facticity. I'm thankful for fundamental faith in eternal values. I'm grateful and thankful for compassion given and received, and for learning time as qualitative rather than quantitative, for learning and love, especially love of God and love of neighbor. As one friend taught me, all the rest is commentary. And then I quote, one little quote. We're going to be done in 1 minute. I would not sleep here if I could, except for the little green leaves in the wood and the wind on the water. It's a quote from Alexander McLeish's book, J.B., which is about the book of Job. Thanks for listening. That's something about my life.